the summer of 1978, my mother was 19 years old. The 70s were swinging, the Eagles and Jimmy Buffett were playing on the radio, and teenagers spent their time listening to records and kissing in the backseat of cars. My mother lived in Dover, New Hampshire, and often listened to the radio to pass the time in the evenings while working at the weather vane with her best friend Melissa. And over the radio, she heard a voice she would get accustomed to very quickly. Radio DJs were the celebrities of the age, and Ted Garland of WHEB had caught my mother's attention. He had a smooth voice and a smile that made girls melt. Okay, maybe not, but he was still a heartthrob. August 17th, 1978. WHEB was doing a live broadcast from Shaheen's Fun Park in Salisbury, and my mom wasn't going to miss it. She and her best friend Melissa headed out to the park in hopes to meet the man whose voice she had heard for months. When they finally saw him, he was busy, as most DJs were when they were working. They had built up their mobile studio with a large barricade, and when the broadcast would start, they'd throw prizes into the amassing crowd to make the park sound exciting and lively. Immediately, my mom thought my dad was, as she put it, the cutest person she had ever seen. To look adventurous, my mom and her friend Melissa decided to enjoy some of the attractions for a while before attempting to talk to my father. They entered the haunted house, a choice my mother would soon regret. As they walked through, my mother was convinced that it would be cheesy and full of bad animatronics. Little did she know that costumed actors were hiding in the dark. Even as she tried to crouch down and crawl through the space, more hands were there to swipe at their legs. And one of them made the unwise choice to touch my mother. My mother ran screaming from the haunted house, tripping on the stairs on the way down. Thankfully, someone was there to catch her. Someone who was soon to be very special. My dad caught my mother while he was on the air, and the two fated lovers finally met. He interviewed her, and the two lovebirds were set on their lifelong adventure. This is generally the part where you would think everything goes smoothly, but you'd be wrong. My mother and her friend went into a photo booth and wrote their numbers on the back of the card and agreed that whoever my father called could go out with him. And he never called either of them, probably because he had a girlfriend, which wouldn't last long. To tell you about my mother's personality is to tell you what she did next. When he didn't call her, she called him. A few days later, my mom called up WHEB and talked to my father, who agreed to see her that night after the graveyard shift. And that night, the two of them went out for ice cream at Howard Johnson's and talked about everything and nothing. If you were to ask either one, they say they probably kissed outside the radio station in my dad's new car that night. When my mom went home, she immediately hoped he'd call again, which of course he didn't. So she called him. And when he went into the radio station after the date, he looked at his coworker Mark Andrews and said, "I think she might be the one." So what makes them work? Genuine personalities, being nice to their families and parents, mutual understanding, determination and patience, a love for adventure and fun, eternal, balanced love for each other. So, nearly 40 years later, my parents are still deeply in love today, and me and my siblings are more than grateful for that. Here's to another 40 years.